Game of Thrones' single most satisfying death. Let me start by saying that this video is heavily opinion based, which means a lot of you are not going to agree with me, which is totally fine. Feel free to let me know in the comments what your opinion on the matter is, but be sure to let me know why as well. On to the topic at hand. Game of Thrones' single most satisfying death is not one of the big ones you might have been thinking about. It's not Cersei, Joffrey, Ramsay or Walder Frey. It's not Peter Baelish either. Game of Thrones' most satisfying death is that of Ellaria Sand. And in her wake, but to a lesser extent, those of the Sand Snakes were almost as satisfying. Why? Not because of the manner in which they died. The Sand Snake's death in the sea battle with Euron Greyjoy's fleet was quite cool to see. And although Ellaria's death in the dungeons of King's Landing had a high degree of a twisted and sadistic satisfaction to it, especially from Cersei's perspective, it felt a bit similar to the way in which Septa Unella met her fate. So no, it's not the glorious way in which these characters met their end that makes these deaths the most satisfying out of them all. It's about what these characters represented. Because for me, the Dornish storyline is the shining example of where it all went wrong for Game of Thrones. The exact moment that Ellaria and the Sand Snakes start planning their revenge and their takeover of Dorne in Season 5 is the starting point of the vicious negative spiral that would eventually bring us to the disastrous Season 8. The moment that David Benioff and Daniel Wise thought, fuck this shit, we can write a better story than George R.R. Martin can. Now, to make sure this video will be a bit more than just a 10-minute rant about D&D destroying one of the best fantasy series ever made, I've divided my argumentation into 3 sections. We'll start by taking a look at what we missed because the Dornish storyline was changed. Then we'll take a look at what the showrunners changed to give Ellaria and the Sand Snakes their story arc, and why this does not make any sense in most cases. Lastly, and maybe the most important part, we'll zoom in on why these changes were made. So what did we miss? Well, for starters, Doran Martell. The only aspect of the Dornish story that is faithfully portrayed in Game of Thrones is the fact that Doran was seen as an inactive ruler by his people. But in reality, he wasn't. Ever since his sister Elia's death, Doran has been diligently working on the downfall and utter destruction of House Lannister, but not in the usual Dornish way. Doran Martell is not the type to throw Dorne into open war with the Lannisters to get his revenge. Mainly because he knows Dorne would lose such a war. No, Doran plays the long game, using intrigue and diplomacy to achieve his goals. So what has he been up to these last 17 years? Right after Robert's rebellion, Doran sends his brother Oberyn to Braavos to sign a pact with Sir Willem Darry, protector of the young Viserys and Daenerys. In exchange for Viserys marrying Doran's daughter Arianne, Dorne will support the Targaryens in taking back their throne from the Baratheons and the Lannisters. This plan eventually goes awry when Viserys gets himself killed by Khal Drogo. In response, Doran sends his son Quentyn to Meereen with the purpose of marrying Daenerys Targaryen, to uphold the Dornish pact with the Targaryens, all while betrothing his youngest son Trystane to Myrcella Baratheon and sending his brother Oberyn to King's Landing to keep up appearances. Doran Martell likes to play Savas on multiple boards. And for those of you that haven't read the books, you might just have heard some names that sound unfamiliar. Which brings me to the second thing we missed: Doran's 2 other children. We know Trystane from Game of Thrones, who is Doran's youngest child and youngest son. His elder brother Quentyn is a POV character in the books, in which we follow his quest to Meereen to gain Daenerys' hand in marriage. Quite a fiery storyline, if you ask me, and a shame we didn't get to see it. The more interesting of the 2 children that we're missing, however, is Arianne, Doran's daughter and eldest child, making her the rightful heir to Dorne under Dornish law. Arianne is a willful young woman who knows how to use her good looks to get what she wants. As her brother Quentyn, she is a POV character in the books, and in her story so far, we learn that she is under the assumption that her father wants to replace her as heir to Dorne in favor of her brother Quentyn. Appalled at this prospect and dissatisfied with the inactive rule of her father, She seduces the Kingsguard knight Sir Aerys Oakhart and hatches a plan to crown Myrcella as the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms after Joffrey's death, based on the fact that under Dornish law, her claim is stronger than Tommen's. The plan goes awry. Myrcella loses an ear in the fighting, and Doran locks up his daughter in a tower cell. And she's not the only one who's locked up there, because the Sand Snakes, who had been calling for war after their father Oberyn's death, have been locked up there as well. Not Ellaria though. And this is because in the books she is actually a very gentle and kind-hearted woman, who speaks out against the older Sand Snakes for wanting revenge out of fear for her daughters' lives. Because none of these 3 are her daughters. The 4 youngest of Oberyn's 8 bastard daughters are Ellaria's, and the oldest is only 14, not old enough to go to war. But luckily there's no age limit for using YouTube, so if you're enjoying the video, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for the algorithm. I'm trying to get to 1000 subscribers, and your help in achieving that goal is very much appreciated. That's already quite some storylines we missed in Game of Thrones. And these are really only the things that have outright been cut before the show started to actively change the Dornish story. Because the status quo that a lot of people are unhappy with Doran's inactive rule is what we still get to see in the show. And this makes sense. Doran may have been actively working on revenge for his sister and the downfall of House Lannister for the past 17 years. He didn't share his plans with anyone. In the show, he is killed by Ellaria. She and the Sand Snakes take over Dorne and we get the Dornish Girlboss arc. In the books, he first locks up the Sand Snakes and his daughter, after which he releases them and finally shares the plan he has been working on for so long. Arianne finds out that she was supposed to marry Viserys and become the queen of all the Seven Kingdoms, hence why Doran would prep her brother Quentyn as the next ruler of Dorne. And the Sand Snakes agree with Doran's plans and start playing their own roles as well. Which brings me to the next thing we missed out on. Which is the intriguing characters that the Sand Snakes were supposed to be. In the show, we only meet the oldest 3, and they are one-dimensional NPCs. The oldest 2 try to solve everything with fighting, the youngest tries to seduce herself out of every problem. Obara comes closest to how she is portrayed in the show, although she shows some intelligence in the books by playing an active role in Doran's plan. Intelligence which she clearly does not have in Game of Thrones. Nymeria is the daughter of a noble woman from Volantis, mostly known for her proficiency with hidden blades. Because of her mother and her overall demeanor, she is nicknamed Lady Nym. Contrary to the show, she possesses quite some diplomatic talent, as Doran sends her to King's Landing to fill the vacant council seat Oberyn left behind. Tyann is the daughter of a Septa, and her knowledge of poisons is as good as Oberyn's. She portrays herself as sweet and shy, but is as dangerous as her sister Obara. She also doesn't have the Dornish look, being fair-haired and pale of skin. Doran sends her to King's Landing in the guise of a Septa, to gain the confidence of the High Sparrow. And those are just the Sand Snakes we have seen. The 4th Sand Snake, Sarella, is the daughter of a Summer Islander captain, which would have been a great opportunity for HBO to include some diversity in one of their shows that would not have felt forced. She hasn't physically entered the story in the books yet, but Doran states that she is to be left alone to play her game in Old Town, insinuating she is part of Doran's plans as well. Ellaria's daughters, the 4 youngest Sand Snakes, are less developed characters because of their age. Although the oldest, Elia, does accompany Arianne when she is sent to Storm's End to meet a certain silver-haired and purple-eyed boy who has invaded the Stormlands. Another of Doran's plans to make sure House Lannister will fall from power. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to know the full details on what has already happened, go read the books. They are amazing. And if you've already read the books and want to speculate further, there are dozens and dozens of hours of fan theories on everything the Dornish are supposedly working on behind the scenes. If all is to be believed, they are the Illuminati of Westeros. But even if they are not involved in everything the theory crafters are writing, the aforementioned summary of storylines we already missed would make any A Song of Ice and Fire fan sad. Let's not linger too long on that then, but let's take a look on what we got in return. The Dornish Girl Boss arc. Ellaria and the Sand Snakes are transformed into mindless, one-dimensional characters hell-bent on revenge. Prince Doran is relegated from a master of intrigue and diplomacy to a weak pawn who lets himself be fooled not once but twice by this group of bastard women who hold no actual power. Doran and Trystane are killed off, and with them seemingly dies House Martell. And except for Doran's personal bodyguard Areo Hota, the Dornish guards stand aside and let it happen. I know this is Dorn, where bastards have a better standing than in the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. But never in 1,000 years would a group of female bastards take over an entire kingdom from a noble house that has united and ruled said kingdom for thousands of years. And they even achieved this feat with minimal blood being spilled. It makes no sense at all. It simply wouldn't happen. Important to note here is that during their coup, they killed Marcella Baratheon in the process. After taking over power in Dorne, they ally themselves with Daenerys' faction and get themselves captured or killed in the first real battle they participate in. Which makes you wonder what the point of all these changes was. And that seems to be the end of Dorne. Until the very last episode, that is. Because during the council where Bran is chosen as king, we see a new Prince of Dorne, wearing the Martell colors and sigil, who, according to D&D at least, is Doran's brother. This character does not exist in the books, but that is beside the point. This makes Ellaria and the Sand Snakes gaining control over Dorne even more absurd. Why would they just hand over power to these bastards when there is still a legitimate ruler of House Martell alive? This Dornish storyline that they concocted truly is the disappointment that keeps on disappointing. Which lands us on the why. And I can think of two possibilities as to why they so severely changed the Dornish plot. Number one is time concerns. Introducing a new major player in the Game of Thrones this late in the story might have been a task that D&D were not willing to undergo. Presenting the story to us in its current form gave them an opportunity to keep Dorne in the story, but with minimal depth and ready to be killed off when the already established characters needed more screen time. It might even be that Season 5 was the moment that D&D started getting tired of their Game of Thrones jobs and wanted to wrap things up and move on to other projects. But that's pure speculation. Reason 2. The release of Season 5 around 2015 coincided with the upcoming social justice or woke movement. Movies started to be forcibly diversified, characters got race swapped, and female characters started getting more prominent roles, even if this deviated from their source material. And this might just be what happened to the Dornish storyline. Pulling stunts like House the Dragon, changing the race of one of the major houses for example, would be quite difficult to do at this point in the story. It would look a bit weird if House Tyrell were black all of a sudden. But changing the storylines in such a way that women get more important roles at the cost of male characters would be quite a manageable change. And I'm not just throwing this out there purely based on gut feeling. There is one very important line spoken by Ellaria that tells us a lot about the intentions of the screenwriters. And it's the following.
And weak men will never rule Dorne again.
They could have chosen to deliver this line in multiple ways, but they chose this option. Dorne will never be ruled by weak men again. Not weak rulers, not weak people, not a weak house, weak men. Which makes it quite clear to me what their intentions were. And the strangest thing about this reasoning is the following. If you want women to play a more prominent role in your story, why do you cut the one female character who could legally rule one of the kingdoms in her own right? Without her husband having to die and her kids being too young to inherit, that is. Arianne Martell, the Princess of Dorne, is the only female character whose claim to power is stronger than that of her male siblings. And she got cut in favor of this travesty. A huge missed opportunity. In the end, I don't think the reasons for the change were just one of the aforementioned two. It was a combination of trying to skip content because of time constraints and an attempt to score woke points by diversifying the story. For me, the Durning storyline will always feel like one of the greatest missed opportunities in Game of Thrones. And that's the reason I was so glad to see Ellaria and the Sand Snakes finally disappear from the screen. Hence the reason why their deaths were the most satisfying for me in the entire 8-season series. Now, as I said in the beginning, I'm very curious about your opinions on this matter, because I'm quite sure a lot of you won't agree with me. So let me know in the comments. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you next time.